Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. My name is Diana Moya. I'm the South Bend Human Rights Commission Housing Director. And I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this morning. And our topic today is updates, housing issues and COVID-19. This will be covered by our guest speaker, Judith Fox, who is the clinical professor of law at the Notre Law School. And then we will also be hearing from Mark Torma, Executive Director of the Indiana Lawyer Network, and the services that they provide. So we're excited to have both of you with us today. And so thank you so very much for taking this opportunity to enlighten us with further information during this pandemic that has caused many of us to have hardships. And so this is just one more avenue of information for folks, whether you are the receiver or whether you're a community connector. We'd appreciate getting the word out. Also, the presentation and or information will be available. You're more than welcome to call us here at the commission so we can get that information to you. You may email me as well, and I'll provide my email towards the end of the presentation. Also, I'd like to let everyone know before I turn this over to Judy and Mark that this is being recorded, and you can find the recording on the city's YouTube webpage. And again, that's City of South Bend. We will also have a chat area where you can ask questions, and we will try to get to those questions to the presenter as soon as possible so that the question can be answered. So please leave your questions in the chat area. There's also a little, if you're on Microsoft Teams, there's a little area where you can raise your hand. If you can do that, again, we will try to get to your question as soon as possible. If we are unable to answer your question at the time that you post it, please, we will ensure to get an answer to you as soon as possible. And again, you can always contact the commission, and I'll provide our contact information towards the end of this presentation. And then without further ado, I will turn this over to Judy and Mark.
Okay. I'm hoping you can all see this. And I foolishly forgot to put my email on here. So if you have questions that don't get answered today, please feel free to email me at jfox@nd.edu. But also, if you have questions about your own situation or a client situation, please get in touch with me. So I wanted to start with, I'm focusing a lot today on evictions because that right now is the more crucial thing, because the moratorium, the state moratorium, is going to, for initiating evictions or foreclosures, is going to expire on July 4th. This is the state moratorium. It's important to understand that there are other moratoriums out there, but what we are being told from landlords across the country, but landlords locally as well, is that they have hundreds and hundreds of them piled up ready to file. So we have a looming crisis that we need to work on right away to prevent. I was at a webinar yesterday, and some of you may have been there, with Michael Desmond, who wrote the very famous book Evicted, and they are looking at this across the country. And as the moratorium has fallen off in different states, the eviction filings have skyrocketed. So, you know, this isn't Chicken Little. The sky really is falling, okay? Even though there's a moratorium, people are obligated to pay their rent, and obviously in this situation, they haven't been able to. So, oh, see, it was updated and I didn't update it. It's important to note that for the other piece of this, for Section 8 folks who got stimulus money or whatever, if you're on Section 8, you've got the ability to go back and ask that your income be recertified. So if you have no income, they can recertify you to nothing. The problem we're having is that you can't get through to the housing authority. And I understand that's a real problem for folks, but I would tell people to at least try to do that, because if no rent is owed, then you don't have that problem. Also, they can't count the stimulus money as rent money.
Judy, before you go on, do you have your presentation up and running?
I do. You can't see it?
No.
Oh, let me try back here then. Sorry. Let me reshare it. I think there we go. Can you see it now?
Yes.
And is it in the right format, or are you seeing the whole?
We're seeing the whole screen.
Okay. I was hoping to be able to see you guys as well, but I guess I can't. All right. Sorry.
That's okay. That works. That works for us.
All right. So this is the emergency, and actually we used these screens before, and so some of this I just realized I have to update as I'm talking to you, and I'll fix it before we share it.
Okay.
So this moratorium on evictions was just extended for HUD to July 24th. So I will correct that slide before we send it out. And what it says is that you can't file before July 24th, and you can't actually throw somebody out before August 24th. You can still be evicted for other things. You know, in other words, if there's drug use in the apartment, or you're doing some other major lease violation, though they're asking the housing authority not to do that. The housing authority locally is not evicting anything. For Section 8, the moratorium is actually by state law expires July 4th, but by federal law it expires July 24th. I do not think people know this. I don't think people are going to be aware of this, and I know the courts aren't aware of this. So it's going to be really important for people to have lawyers if they're on Section 8 and someone files a termination. It has always been federal law that you can't either terminate your voucher, or you can't, well, I'm sorry, under this new group, you can't terminate someone's voucher because they didn't pay their portion before you could. But it's always been federal law that you can't evict someone for non-payment of the housing authority's portion, though that happens all the time. One thing we are concerned about is what we call abandonment terminations, and this is going to apply to foreclosures as well as evictions. You know, someone gets sick, or someone's caring for a family member, or quite frankly, some people have just gotten stuck in other communities, and because of the restrictions haven't been able to get back. So again, it's really important if somebody's voucher gets terminated because they said they've abandoned the property and they haven't, to please, please, please get a lawyer. Call us. So getting to foreclosures. The moratorium on filing foreclosures, FHFA extended it to August 31st. USDA and HUD just did the same, I think, yesterday. So basically, nobody can file a foreclosure till August 31st. We're really worried about foreclosures. Delinquencies were up by 4%. There's about 4 million people in forbearance. Almost a third of all mortgage holders did not make their June 1st payment across the country. And the July statistics are even higher. I'm actually presenting at a conference tomorrow with the mortgage bankers group. And there's a general sense out there that this moratorium is going to be extended even further than August 31st. Probably to the end of the year. We all think that the opinion is that because of the election, it's going to get pushed off. But this is good news and bad news, right? Because when there's a moratorium, people, even if they can pay, don't want to pay. And if you're not in forbearance, you know, that could cause a lot of problems. So even if there's a moratorium, we are really encouraging people to go out and get that forbearance that they're entitled to, if they're entitled to it. And we'll talk about that, the details of that later on. But, you know, folks who are having issues with mortgages really need to reach out so we can make sure that they're going to be all right when this is all over. All right, now back to evictions. There is a lot of money out there, folks, and we need to be using it. The problem I'm having is that it's promised, but apparently not out in the community yet in many situations. I was hoping, and I am hoping, that this money will be flowing before the moratorium expires. There is a quite extensive effort right now between local charities, cities, United Way, to get this information out. We're going to be meeting with landlord groups later this week or next week to try to encourage landlords to send their tenants to apply for this money before they file for eviction. We have created some web-based applications for it that I would just say keep your ears open. We're hoping to get all of this and do a big media blitz very, very shortly. I'm going to go and explain some of this. Okay, here's what I know. There is, and this I got updated information at like 11:30 last night, so I didn't change all of this. So what do I know? There shelter grants have gone out to several agencies: Center for the Homeless, Life Treatments, Dismiss Center, Upper Room, Hope Rescue Mission. That's for housing people, like emergency shelter. What I'm really mostly interested in is the rental assistance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So through the United Way right now, St. Vincent's, DePaul, United Religious Community, Salvation Army, Imanin, and Unidad have gotten grant awards to help with rental assistance. Those grant awards, are $122,000. The problem is they don't have all the money yet. Some of it's coming through United Way, and some of it's coming through the Emergency Food and Shelter Grant. The Emergency Food and Shelter Grant has not arrived yet. There's also $60,000 out in the community to Catholic Charities, St. Vincent, La Casa, Real Services, for utility assistance. The city of South Bend, the city of Mishawaka, and the county all received significant COVID funds that are specifically designed for rental assistance and utility assistance. So this is to help anyone who couldn't pay their rent because of COVID or couldn't pay the utilities because of COVID to make those payments. It's supposed to pay the full payments. This isn't supposed to be you get $50 here, $50 there, $50 there. It's supposed to make all the payments. The city of South Bend had a grant process. If you can see the screen, this is their official word on that. We're waiting to see who was awarded the grants. And once they've been awarded, if you live in South Bend, you can go to those agencies. I think, but don't know. It's going to be Real Services and St. Vincent de Paul to get that money. And there's a lot of money.
Judy, we have a question. I'm sorry. We have a question from David Hurley. He's asking, are there protections for tenants who have to break their lease from recourse by their landlords? For example, a student who had a lease through July but moved out to go home in April.
No, is the answer to that one.
Okay.
I dealt with that one. I can't tell you how many times. We're hoping, some landlords were really nice about it. Some landlords were not. It is possible, depending on the wording of your lease. So there's one case out there that I know of. It's in Illinois. It's not in Indiana, where a commercial tenant was able to convince the court that particular clause in the lease for emergencies like this could excuse. So what I would say is it's good. We'd have to look at the lease to be sure, but as a general rule, no, you're obligated on the lease. Now, this was made more complicated by COVID as well, because typically the landlord has an obligation to re-rent the place. So in other words, you might have left 3 months early, but if they could re-rent it in a month, then you wouldn't have to pay the whole 3 months. The problem was in COVID, nobody was re-renting.
Right.
So I dealt with that many, many, many times. The city of Mishawaka has given their rental assistance money to the Mishawaka Food Pantry. So if you live in Mishawaka and you need rental assistance, that's where you go. Real Services has their utility money. The county money seems to be a black hole. Nobody will answer me as to who's administering that. My guess would be your best bet, if you don't live in either the city, but just the county, would be to try the township trustees, perhaps.
Mhm.
Now, the other piece of this that is any money that derived from the federal government, the COVID money, you wouldn't be eligible if you're an undocumented immigrant. The money that comes through United Way, COVID, would be different. So it's really going to depend. I can't say for certain if those folks are going to get covered or not, but I would say at least apply. Most agencies have at least some, essentially we're going to prioritize the people that can only get COVID funding through COVID funding first, and then try to help the other folks with the other kind of funding. But please apply. And as I said, we are working really hard to get web-based applications out there, and we're going to try to do a big media blitz soon, so that people can start applying, and hopefully the landlords will hold off. These, for those who couldn't understand my wording, these are the agencies that I know are getting funding or have already gotten funding through United Way. As of last night, I was told the emergency food and shelter money is not actually in yet, even though it has been promised to them. And we are trying to, I've got some students working right now, contacting each of these agencies to find out what their procedures are going to be, so that people can apply as quickly as possible.
Judy, can you apply to more than one source of funding, or?
We are hoping not. We are hoping that when you go to one source, you're going to get all the money you need.
Okay.
That's the plan, to try to avoid what has been the practice. And I can't, agencies are going to do what agencies are going to do. But what we're hoping is that agencies aren't going to make people get $50 from you, $50 from you, $50 from you, right? We're hoping that they're going to be willing to pay, especially with this COVID money, because that's what it's designed for. Because the idea is if you only get $50, you're still going to get evicted, right? And the idea is to prevent the eviction filing. The other thing that we're trying to reach out to the agencies to really encourage is, a lot of agencies in the past have required an eviction filing before they would give money. The damage is already done if there's an eviction filing. Right. So what we're hoping is, and I think some of the larger organizations we've talked to have already agreed to this, that they will accept, a notice to quit or a letter from the landlord with the ledger saying, here's how much is owed. Because once that eviction is filed, it's already a problem to get another house.
Judith,
yeah.
we have a couple questions. So we have a question from let's see here, Ms. Bennett, who asked, how many months can you receive help?
So the COVID funding is supposed to bring you current, right? You have to have been current on March 1st. But the idea of the COVID money is if you haven't paid April, May, and June, and July, you should be able to get all of it. Now, once you get it, we don't know if you're going to be able to go back for more, is what I'm saying, right?
Okay.
So that's going to depend on how quickly the money is spent and what the agencies decide to do with it. I think, I think the idea would be to bring as many people current as possible and then figure out what we're going to do going forward. And this, I said there's like $250,000 out there right now, but I will tell you that when the city of Houston's a lot bigger than us, granted, but when the city of Houston, who had millions, opened up, the money was gone in 3 days. So that's why we're really trying to work with landlords to try to, work out ways. The other thing that we're trying to do is to see if we can negotiate with landlords to the extent that the money runs out, payment plans and things.
Right. So, Judy, there was a question by Allison who, right along the lines of what you're sharing right now, is there any way to get landlords to reduce their rents, given that the market will be distorted when evictions are allowed again?
I think it's going to be unlikely. I'm working with the landlords. We're talking to the landlords. we're hoping to make that point. The problem we've got is that the landlords are really being squeezed. And I'll be honest with this. You know, a lot of the relief funding that was available, you know, for mortgages, for other things, small businesses and things, landlords were excluded.
Mm-hmm.
So landlords, especially the small landlords that we're trying to keep in business, frankly, the local landlords, as opposed to the large, you know, corporations that don't ever work with people, they're financially really hurting. So that's why I'm trying to work with them to figure out what it is that they need and how we can do this. And ironically, I think that the rents are actually going to go up because housing is going to be, the housing crisis that we've had is going to be worse.
When do you see that? When do you see that increase happening? Like after you know, the majority of the people are now current, so we're going to go ahead and.
Yeah, we're already seeing it.
Okay.
We're already seeing it in other places that have opened up. We're seeing rents going up and evictions going up.
What's the percentage that you see of the rent increase?
It's all over the place.
Okay.
You know, we're not San Francisco, right?
Right.
So, you know, so we really don't know what's going to happen. And there's a lot of other pieces playing into this in our local community that are hard to know. So, you know, for instance, Notre Dame's decision not to have students living off campus means that we've got more housing than we've ever had available. So we might not see those rental increases because we've got more landlords with properties that normally would have been rented by students, right? So our local community could be different. We could see something more stable here. But there is growing concern across the country that we are looking at a real housing crisis. I'm so cheerful this morning, aren't you?
You are. It's just great.
So this is the piece that I think is so important. And I don't think that, well, not only do I don't think it, I know that this is not out there in the public domain. People do not understand this. This is not a complete list. There are more, more out there, but the more of the federal, the CARES Act moratorium on filing for eviction goes to July 24th by federal law. And even if you file July 24th, you can't ask anybody to move out until August 24th. This is for any federal related housing. Now, many courts across the country have actually added a new form to their evictions that require the landlord to certify that they're not federally related housing. I don't think our courts are even aware of this. I'm working on that issue right now. But these are some of the most common ones that would be affected. So basically any federal housing, any public federal housing, the moratorium should be there till July 24th. Any Section 8, whether it's project-based or voucher-based, you should not be able to file till July 24th. Senior housing, LITC housing, that's housing that was funded through a low-income tax credit. And the most important one, and the one that will slip through for everybody, if the landlord has a mortgage on the rental property, and that is a federally related mortgage, which would be Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, any of those, they can't file for eviction. Now, I know that landlords don't know this, and I'm positive tenants don't know this. And the bigger problem is, how do you find out? So this is going to be a real issue of advocacy that we're going to have to work on with the courts and the judges. What I am hoping, and I'm not all that certain that I'm going to be able to succeed in this. I've reached out to the St. Joseph County Bench and Bar Committee, of which I'm a member, to reach out to the courts to see if we could get them to do what other courts across the country have done and add a little form that will be in effect till July 24th that says, I certify that I'm not federally related housing before they can file. We don't know if that's going to happen. We don't know if they're going to be willing to do that. So now, I don't know if you want me to go on to the things that I covered back in May as a recap. I didn't know about your time, or you wanted to go to Mark and come back to that. That's what it's up to you.
Absolutely. Please go forward and do your recap. I think Mark we talked about it a little bit before, so we know that his is going to be more of a sharing his contact information and what the services provided. So I think we're good with that. Is that right, Mark? Okay.
So if anybody has a mortgage that is backed by any of these, FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, USDA, you are entitled to a temporary forbearance. Many banks are giving people temporary forbearances, even if they're not, right? Because they are, as I said, almost a third of all people in this country did not make their June mortgage payment. They know they've got a crisis. You can know if you have them. There are several ways you can look this up. There's a web-based way to look up Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. FHA, you usually can tell by the paperwork, but if your loan has been sold to somebody else, you might not be able to tell. So this is a phone number that you can call. And again, we're going to make all of this available as soon as I fix those dates that are wrong in the first one.
Mhm.
VA, it'll be clear on your mortgage documents, but also, you only had a VA loan if you're a vet. So you would probably know that. If your lender is the U.S. government, you are clearly a USDA loan, but there are also other USDA loans that you should be able to tell from on your paperwork if they're USDA. All of these folks, this is the federal moratorium. Right now, it's expiring in July or in August 31st. They extended it to August 31st, but honestly, folks, everyone expects that's going to get extended. If you really don't know, you can send a letter to the bank to ask who owns, insures, or guarantees your loan. You have to do it to a very special address that should be on your statement. It'll say for QUIDROs or RFIs. If you send it to the normal address you send your payments, or you send it to the customer service address, they will ignore it. It has to go to that special secret address. It's supposed to be available online on their website as well, but they hide it. So that's the special address. And they'll tell you who owns, insures, or guarantees your loan, and that'll tell you if you're entitled to this federal protection. You are not supposed to be asked for an application. You're supposed to be able to just say, look, I couldn't pay because of COVID. You're entitled to a full, basically, year of forbearance. What we're finding is the banks are giving you 3 months, and then they're asking you to call back in 3 months. But you're entitled to a full year if you ask for it. As long as you ask by the end of, right now, it's December 31st. As I said, the bankers, from what they're telling us and what they're talking to people, they think that's going to get extended. We don't know. But it's mandatory. They have to give it to you. Now, this is where it starts to get tricky. The forbearance does not include escrow items, which is taxes, insurance, condo dues, homeowner association, any of those other things that get escrows, right? So you're going to have to either pay those things, which can really screw up your loan, by the way. If it's normally escrowed and you go out and pay your taxes, they get double paid and banks still charge you. So I wouldn't recommend that. What you want to do is pay the bank those escrow items. And I'll get back to that one in a minute. They can't charge you fees, penalties, or interests because you were late. In other words, they have to act as if you made the payment, and they can charge interest on the loan for the part that you paid, but not the part that you didn't have to pay. Mm-hmm. There isn't anybody out there that thinks they're going to do this right. So I really expect a mess when this is all done, trying to straighten that out. But just telling you what the law says. No payments are due during the forbearance, but you can make the payment if you want to. In other words, if you have a partial payment or something, you're supposed to be able to make that during this forbearance period. And they are not supposed to be able to report you as late. In other words, it's supposed to show that you are current on your credit report. These are things that we are going to have to check and see if it's actually happening. Mm-hmm. Non-federal loans, many of the banks out there are offering this forbearance because they would rather do that than have a whole bunch of foreclosures and they can't file anyway. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be about bank by bank issue. All right. These are the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which are the most common loans. I think it's 60 to 80% of the loans. I always forget the number. Once you get out of forbearance, they have to give you a repayment plan. Well, here's what they can do. They can give you a repayment plan. In other words, you pay back the money you weren't able to pay during the forbearance, and you have 12 months to do it. They can give you a loan mod, right? Which basically puts all the money that you couldn't pay during the forbearance at the very end of your loan, non-interest bearing. So it basically extends out. So then when the loan gets paid off, then you pay that off, or if you sell the house. They can do what's called an extend modification, right? So it keeps your loan the same. It just extends out the term of the loan, and then it spreads out those escrow payments you couldn't make up to 60 months to get those paid back. Or what's called a cap and extend, which basically is they recapitalize, they add everything back up and essentially do you a new loan and extend it out. If you were already in default when this started in March, your only option is what's called a flex mod. And what a flex mod does is it reduces your loan payments by 20% by reducing the interest rate or stretching the loan out, if they can manage to do that. So that's your only option if you were in default. And this is an important point, by the way. You're entitled to forbearance even if you were already in default at the beginning. Unlike most of the rental money and things, if you were behind on your mortgage, you're still entitled to a forbearance. Even if you were in foreclosure, you're still entitled to this forbearance on these federal loans.
Judy, I have a question before you go
Sure.
forward. Regarding the credit report, going back to that, we have a guest who, Pamela, who asked, I heard some banks are adding remarks on the credit report and affecting people's credit. So I know you said, that we would look for that, but what's the best way to handle that with regards to the credit report? And then I have a second question after that.
So I would tell people that clearly they want to pull the credit report and see if that's happening. There is a somewhat complicated procedure that you need to follow, but basically what you do is you send a dispute to the credit bureau saying that this is improper. If it's not changed, you have, quite frankly, a very valuable lawsuit. And if you contact me, I can refer you to a whole number of lawyers who can help you with that.
Thank you for
Yeah.
And then the second question is, should landlords be completing those mortgage identification forms before they enter their eviction hearing?
Well, it's not required here yet. What we're hoping is to convince the courts that they should be, right? I would say that at the very least, the question should come up in the hearing, but I don't think that I would be stunned and amazed if landlords even know that this law is out there.
Okay.
And that's why we're trying to get this information out there.
Right. So if you're a community connector, please contact Judy so we can get this information out there.
Yes. Definitely. And if you've got clients any clients who's facing eviction, please reach out. We've got legal services has just gotten some money to hire someone else. They have staff as well. And Mark's going to talk about the end about the lawyer network. We're going to try to train some lawyers up. It's going to be so important in this phase to have a lawyer in those cases. So I wanted to just talk about what the flex mods are so people understand. The flex mods, what they do is they look at your payments and they try to reduce it by 20%. And they can extend your loan out another to 480 months. They can set the interest rate at what the loan mod rate is. Rates are falling. I don't know what it is right now, but they're low. And they can include principal forbearance. Honestly, principal forbearance doesn't happen in Indiana very often because where our housing prices were to begin with. The key to all of these, though, is you got to ask, right? And people are afraid to ask right now, but you need to ask. Right. One of the other concerns we've got is that some folks, you tend to have the people who were vulnerable during the last crisis are the same people that are vulnerable during this crisis because they have those kinds of jobs that they get laid off first, or service jobs, right? Low paying jobs. And they may already have been in a loan mod with a 1% rate, which means they can't go any lower. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen with those folks. They're the ones that are really going to need to get to a housing counselor to get to me. Hetty Robinson here in South Bend is one of the best housing counselors in the state. I'd say she's one of the best housing counselors in the country. That's what she does. She's fabulous. La Casa and Goshen, if you're in that part of the area, they're fabulous as well on housing counseling. And there are others out there as well, but they're both HUD certified counselors. Really important to work with a HUD certified counselor if you're looking at loan lots. FHA, a little bit different, but not much. You must ask for it, of course, which is stupid to me. They should just give these to people who aren't paying or whatever. If you are less than 30 days, so after the forbearance, if you are less than 30 days late on March 1st, you could just resume your regular payments and it all gets stuck to the end. Or they can do a principal forbearance, reduce the interest rate, and make it a 30-year term. People who are familiar with FHA loans know that this idea of putting non-interest bearing loan at the end of the loan is how they typically deal with foreclosure mods, and there's a limit of how much they can put at the end. This is going to apparently not affect that limit. In other words, if you've already done this, you still should be able to do it again because of this. You need to make sure you apply for this before it ends, which is right now, December 30th, right? So if you wait till January 1st to ask, and we're telling people, even if they, like I can make my payment now, but my savings is going to run out next month, get the forbearance. You can still make your payment. But if you don't ask before the end of the year right now, you lose the ability to ever get it. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay. Judy, wow. So much information. Please let us know. The commission, we'd be more than happy to collaborate in any way, especially getting the word out, the information out. It's crucial right now. And I think folks are like you stated, they don't want to ask. And we want to make sure that we get that information to them because it's vital information that's needed.
And I just want to stress again, our offices look like they're closed. They are sort of closed, but I'm still out there. And I'll say it again. The easiest way to get to me during this period of time is, which is jfox@nd.edu. I'm willing to talk to your clients. I'm willing to talk to your group. We need to get the word out. Okay.
Judy, thank you so very much. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with us before I turn this over?
Well, we are dealing with a moving target. So that's, one really important thing to understand.
Judy?
I get updates daily. So, we'll try to get all that information out, but keep listening. Okay.
Just 1 second. I think I may have maybe one more. We have a guest, Nancy, who is asking, is similar information as presented in Spanish that we could share through La Casa de Amistad?
I will get it there. Okay. I will. Okay. There are some of the information I have. I know that it's in Spanish. My Spanish is too weak to translate this myself, but I have some speakers and I will get the presentation translated for you. I promise.
And I'll be more than happy to help. So please reach out. Please reach out. And she said, thank you. So, and Nancy, thank you for asking that question. We do want to get this information out to our Spanish speaking community members as well. And then we'll have to have a whole nother webinar based on landlord tenant issues with issues along the lines also of land contracts. So just look for that. That's coming. Judy, thank you so very much. And there's a question from Mr. David Hodges. Yes, so this information will actually, you can find a recording of it on the City of South Bend YouTube webpage. So please tune into that. We have previous presentations, webinars that have been recorded as well. So hopefully that'll answer your question. And then, so without further ado, Mark, thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is Mark Torma, Executive Director of the Indiana Legal Network, volunteer. Sorry, kind of a mouthful. Mark, tell us all about the Volunteer Lawyer Network.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be on. And yes, I just want to share with all of you a variety of the resources, especially through my organization, but through other avenues to help for your constituents, for your clients, for the people that you're coming in contact with, so that they know if they have housing issues, if they're a tenant, if they're facing eviction or other difficulties, or any other housing related issues, that there are certain resources out there. And certainly Judy is amazing, one of our local, state, and national experts. But as everybody would tell you, no one organization can fill the needs of the community. And so knowing everything, taking advantage of everything is extremely important. And yes, so I am the director of the Volunteer Lawyer Network, which is the organization locally that is charged by the Supreme Court with organizing attorneys in the community. So the private practice attorneys that you know of, they have an ethical duty to render pro bono services, that is, give free legal representation to people in the community. And so sometimes it's hard for them to know what's out there. Sometimes it's hard for them to know what clients should be getting pro bono free services and what clients maybe they can afford it, so that the lawyers can focus on helping the lower income people and giving them the representation. So that's the short version of what we exist for. And more to the point, we definitely have volunteer attorneys who are prepared to take on tenant cases and some other housing related cases. We absolutely do have some. That is an area that many lower income people have a definite need for. Well established, so we do have attorneys that will help with that. Our office is familiar with helping with these sorts of things. And so we definitely have a way. If somebody calls our office at 574-277-0075, we will be able to get them in the process of finding a lawyer. We have to talk with them, find out more about their case. We also have to vet them for income. They need to be at or under 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, which definitely includes a lot of people, including a lot of people who work 40 hours a week. There are many people at over 200% that legitimately can't afford legal services, but we attempt to help those at or under, and that's a whole lot of people, especially now with what seems to be a tidal wave of eviction cases coming up. So yes, just know that that number is very useful. We are currently taking calls in an abbreviated fashion because of the COVID crisis. Tuesdays and Thursdays are the days to call up and either reach our staff or leave messages. But they can also access our website if they have an internet connection at www.volunteerlawyernetwork.net. So that is another way of contacting us. They could also email at volunteerinc@att.net. However, there are some other even faster ways to access our services and to interact with other agencies that might be able to help. And I want to highlight several of them here. One, which may be not as efficient currently because of the transition in the city administration, but I had worked with the city of South Bend to work up a process through their 311 information and call center so that people could call in with eviction related problems, and they would go through a process and facilitate the process of doing intake with people so that they might be able to get services through my organization even faster through the city of South Bend. I encourage people to have clients explore that option. I honestly think they just haven't had that number of people using that service to work out some kinks, but they should be doing that. And it's wonderful to be, have Deanna here because, as she knows, I work with her agency, the Human
Mhm.
Rights Commission, to
Mhm.
effectively work up the same sort of facilitated, expedited service. So contacting her office will help some people with the right sort of eviction case get into our process so that they don't have to wait maybe 2.5 to 3 to 4 weeks to get a lawyer. Maybe they can get one in a week or a week and a half, much
Mhm.
faster than they normally would.
Mhm.
The other resource that I wanted to bring up, which I'm not sure people know about here, but it is statewide, it's called Housing for Hoosiers. And the website is housing for, and that's the numeral 4, Hoosiers.org. And it does have a lot of helpful resources on that. Excuse me. It has, for instance, kind of a boilerplate letter that people can send their landlord, letting them know that they've been affected by the coronavirus crisis and that they should, be prepared to possibly have to work with them. It's being proactive with the landlord before any legal action is taken. They also have some resources there for people affected by domestic violence or stalking in terms of how to handle those sensitive housing issues. And they also have a helpful and a 10 or 11 point list of their rights and a few responsibilities as a renter in Indiana, covering things like what the landlord is responsible, things like upkeep, keeping the residence habitable, and that the tenant has the right to privacy. They have the right to enter their home whenever they reasonably have that need, that the landlord has the duty to repair, basic things like that, but that we should not take for granted that the public knows. The public doesn't always know these things, or they may understand things a little differently. There are myths out there about housing, and this is a good resource. There's excellent material on there helping people understand what is and what isn't true about the law of tenants in Indiana. So I highly recommend that resource as well.
Is that a newer resource that is out in the community?
My understanding it is. I think it existed in somewhat of a smaller version earlier, but I think this more virtual site is maybe not more than 2 years old.
Okay.
I only started hearing about it, but yes, Judy.
So I just wanted to, you reminded me that there is a really very new site called, and I put it up on the chat, ABA3legalanswers.org.
Yes.
And so people can go onto that site and ask a question about their housing, and it'll get answered by Indiana lawyers.
Yes.
And, at least for me, when I go on, if it's something that's more complicated and I think you really need an actual lawyer, then we'll offer to represent you. And the other second point I wanted to make is that we prioritize people at 200% of poverty, but I have no federal funding, so I can take people who are higher than that, but actually couldn't afford to pay a lawyer.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's good to know.
That's wonderful. There are very, very few resources out there for that group of people that are, I would say, somewhere between 200 and 350% of federal poverty guidelines that they can't afford a $2,000 or $3,000 legal bill. But they're not going to get services from most people. So yeah, if there are offices like Judy's that can help them, that's worth its weight in gold.
Right. It surely is.
Yeah.
Mark, thank you so much. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with us before we close this webinar?
I would just say that if people can be as proactive as possible, that helps a lot. Every time I'm in discussions with any agency or say the city, we're always trying to let people know they should, if there's ever any question in their mind, they should take action early rather than waiting to see what somebody else does. It's important to be, respectful and, maybe polite, but proactive.
Right.
Don't wait for the problem to come to you. try to prevent the problem. And judges appreciate that sort of activity on your part as a client, and especially a low-income person, advocating for themselves before they can get a lawyer involved. Opposing lawyers appreciate that you have, attempted some sort of remediation of your problem. Even opposing parties, who knows? But I think it's very, very much appreciated, and often can just head out and head up or head off the problem in the first place. Not that anybody should feel the responsibility to solve their problem themselves. That's not the case. But it helps when we can participate in the process as early as possible.
Right. I appreciate
that. Go
ahead, Judy.
I would just echo that. It's really hard to get a lawyer if you call the day before your hearing.
Absolutely.
But if you know you're behind, let's try to work with your landlord. That's even the best way to do it. But as soon as you get anything saying that an eviction is coming up, you need to take action. And the second thing I would say is show up at your hearings. That is
Right. So we hear that too sometimes, that people will not show up because they're afraid. They just don't know what's going to happen. So they, rather than go, they choose not to go.
Right.
Right. Which is a natural human reaction, but it's absolutely the wrong thing to do.
Right. Just like it would be also, I think that, you're afraid to contact, your mortgage lender or your landlord to explain to them, hey, this is what's happening. Just kind of share that we're all in this together. You're not the only person this is happening to. It's a pandemic. It's affected many people. And so we want to be able to get the information out so that we can assist in any way possible.
I just want to comment on a question that came out about whether we're going to be tracking.
Yes.
So there's a national effort out there to try to track them, evictions and foreclosures. Foreclosures are fairly easy to track because of the way they're filed. Evictions are very, very complicated because not all of them go through the courts, even though legally they're supposed to. So informal evictions we can't track. And the way Indiana codes them, it's very hard to track them in our state. Now, I'm a member of the Coalition for Access to Justice, which is an Indiana Supreme Court committee that looks at issues of low-income representation. This issue came up at our last meeting, and Judge Slaughter, who chairs our committee, seemed very interested in working on ways of changing the coding so we can track these better. So that's something that's on everybody's mind, and then we're working on that. So.
So we have a comment from Amy Nelson. Hi, Amy. She is from the Fair Housing Center, I think Midwest. I apologize if I'm getting the title wrong.
Central Indiana. I think
Central Indiana. There we go. And she said, we need you at the State House or working to advance housing at the State House. Join the Who's Your Housing Needs Coalition. And then she provided the info and the link. Thank you, Amy. We appreciate that information from you. Yes, and it's the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. Thank you, Amy. Okay, so folks, thank you. Judy, Mark, thank you so much for your time this morning. I realized that it was more of an hour webinar, so I'm sorry that I said it was 30 minutes, but we really appreciate your time. The information it's in gold. That's all I can say. It's information that people need. We need to pass along. Again, if you're the community connector, please pass this along. If you're someone who needs it, please, use it. If you have questions, you have information in the meeting chat where you can contact Judy, you can contact Mark, you can contact myself, and I can connect you to these folks as well. And so please, use the information. Then also, to our audience, thank you so much for your continued support with our Human Rights Commission webinars. We are taking a little break, but we will be back on Tuesday, July 14th at 11, and that information is forthcoming. So you'll see that come out in an email blast, just like we've been sending all along. And we'd like to thank the entire Human Rights Commission staff for their efforts in assisting us with these webinars. It takes a team, and so and we're a very small team, but it takes a team, and we're happy to get all this information out. And so again, Mark, Judy, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you everyone else for joining us today. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Mark. Bye, Judy.
Bye.